and welcome to another session of Girls Talk TV on RPTV. I'm your host, Huda Haji. Today we have with us Mariam Bello. She has a background in civil engineering from the University of Calgary, and she currently works at Dillion Consulting Limited as a consultant. Mariam, welcome.
Hello.
So can you tell us about yourself? Like, what is your role?
Yeah, so I'm technically an engineering training still, though soon to be a professional engineer, but I work in transportation planning. So really kind of like a very high level type of engineering that deals with urban transportation. So things like traffic from cars, as well as like transit, active transportation, like cycling routes and pedestrian routes and things like that. So we come up with essentially like long-term plans. We kind of have to use a lot of scientific judgment to forecast how people are going to travel and how goods are going to move through cities in the future, and then how can we make it better.
So what exactly inspired you to do this career?
I think in civil engineering in general, like I grew up with quite a few engineers in my family. My dad's an engineer on my mom's side. My uncle is an engineer. My grandpa was an engineer, and so was my great grandpa. And that was always kind of there. But I didn't. When I was in high school, I thought I was going to be an architect, and I was like on a track to do that. And somewhere when I was in grade 12. I looked at some of the courses in university, and I thought that it just seemed a little bit like too artsy for just me as a person. So I kind of thought like civil engineering was always going to be my backup plan, because I thought you could like design the engineering side of buildings, and then if I still wanted to, I could get a master's degree in architecture. And I went into civil engineering, which is a lot broader than just buildings for sure. And I found transportation engineering, and that's something that I really, really liked. And it kind of combined my passion for like the city aspect, which is I think what attracted me to architecture for sure, kind of like that man-made infrastructure side of things, as well as like I just tend to be more interested in kind of math and science, and always have been. And when I did engineering as a degree, I just found that I really, really enjoyed it. And transportation planning, and specifically like the area that I work in, is quite high level, which is where I like to be. I know engineering tends to be seen as this like you're counting to the last decimal number, and many types of engineering are, but in the role that I'm in right now, I kind of am, it's like the perfect spot for the type of things that I'm interested in, and kind of what I tend to gravitate to more.
Nice. That sounds like you put a lot of like your interest into like making like a very specific career, because even like growing up, whenever I hear like things about like engineering, it's just like engineering, and like you don't really know about the specific like different fields, even within like the smaller ones. Like there's mechanical engineering, and then there's biomechanical, and there's like mechatronics and all of that. So it's like really cool to hear how you learn about transportation. So did you consider any other career path other than architecture?
To be honest, like when I was in high school, I'm really a kind of person that likes to plan ahead, which I think again makes sense to where I am in my career today. And like I was again architect. It was like a one-track mind until I really kind of like reflected on what I was signing myself up to do in grade 12, and I was like, I don't know if this is for me. Like I started to have doubts. And when I went into engineering, like civil engineering, civil engineering, because it was going to be a backup for architecture. My dad is an oil and gas engineer. I never really wanted to do that, even though he wanted me to do that for sure. And like when I went into engineering, like he said, I didn't know all those different types. There's so many fields and so many applications for engineering, because like you say, there's kind of like the stereotypical image. Like if you Google engineer, you'll see usually, unfortunately, guys in hard hats at like sites. Like that's what you see. And it's definitely not just that. There's so many different types of engineering. Like we live in an age where there's so many different technologies. Like software is a huge field of engineering, and that's not really thought of as engineering necessarily. Even like you think of like drafting and stuff like that, and like people with these really fancy rulers and stuff, like get it like drawing perfectly scaled lines, and like it's not like that anymore either, because a lot of this stuff is done in a computer. So I found out about this by accident. Like I kind of just fell into a job where once I graduated, when I started work with Dillon Consulting, I had a role where I actually got to rotate through different types of services that they offered and different offices. So I lived in Vancouver, I lived in Winnipeg, I lived in Calgary, I lived in Ottawa. And I got to try like environmental engineering, and I got to try structural engineering, and I got to try municipal engineering. And I honestly, even in school, didn't know all of these types of things. Like when I went into engineering in school, I started to find out more of the streams, as you're saying, because there's the broad like chemical and mechanical, like you say, and civil, but it's more than just that. There's so many different streams. And I think there's definitely like, if you have an aptitude for something like that and an interest in engineering and just solving problems and making the world better, so many different options for people who are interested in doing that.
Well, thank you for that. That, I don't know, it makes me feel so much better to know that like whatever, if you just like have like a interest for, you know, like science and math and solving problems, and you have like other interests without that, you don't have to like completely deny those other interests, and you could use it so well, like, and put it into that field. So what was required to get you into your field? Like, did you have to do anything other, like for school, like there's probably like you said, there's masters. Do anything like other than that, like volunteering or specific extracurriculars that like got you to where you are today?
I would say that I think for me, obviously, like you had to have math and you had to have science in your like prerequisites to get into university, and as well as all your other grades. And those things are important, but I actually want to highlight that, like, I think again, and this is something I hammer in a lot, like I do quite a bit of STEM outreach, especially with sort of younger children, and it's engineering is more than just being good at science and math, and all of those other things you said, like volunteering and all those soft skills, like those are so extremely important. Knowing how to work in a team and get stuff done, it is super duper important. Like it's probably more important than remembering all your calculus like equations. In my job, I don't really even use those necessarily day to day. And like things like knowing how to explain yourself to other people, right? Engineering, the kind of things that we engineer, most engineering fields affect people and day-to-day lives, and so you have to be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing to the average person who has no understanding of what you're trying to do, and kind of like knowing how to answer their questions about how they're being affected through those problems. All of those skills are extremely important. I also, when I was in university, was involved with like a variety of extracurricular activities, and I also fell into them by accident. Like it was like I started one and I really enjoyed it. Like I was with the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation for several years. I was with different engineering societies. I was like with Engineers Without Borders and Oxfam and all of these things. And I think they really helped shape my specific perspective, because they open your horizons to the things that you can affect with your work, right? Like I think of myself like, yes, transportation planning, and yes, I work in an office and I do kind of, you know, like writing reports and going to meetings and some of those stereotypical office stuff. But the work that I create, it affects people's lives. And that's something that was really important to me because, like I said, like volunteering is really important to me, and I wanted to be able to make a positive change. So I don't know if that was necessarily a prerequisite to do what I'm doing, but I think it definitely helped to know some of these issues. Another thing that's been really like near and dear to my heart is kind of like diversity in engineering. And while doesn't necessarily affect my work every single day, but it also kind of does, because one thing that comes up is equity in transportation. And like I say, like I come up with stuff like transportation networks, like transit networks to serve different kinds of neighborhoods and stuff. And understanding the needs of different groups of people is really, really important. And so I think a lot of my work through university, through those extracurricular activities, helps me, my personal identity and my personal experiences, and like having family members who maybe don't make up the majority of what people may look like in all of our cities. That also really helps because I am able to bring up I think like issues that some other people on my team may not have considered because they just never had those kind of life experiences, right? I remember there was one woman who told me she worked for the city of Montreal, and she was even saying like cities usually have standards for example, where you place your street lights. And they're like engineering standards. So let's say your street lamps are going to be, I don't know, every like 2 meters apart or whatever. That's the standard. And she was saying that a lot of the times the standards were designed by men, but men don't often feel uncomfortable, for example, walking at night by themselves. And so they may be more comfortable with streetlights spaced apart. And if there was never a woman on their team, that might not even like be something that they consider. So having all of those other life experiences and all of those other things that you're interested in, I definitely think are important and help shape the work that you do.
Oh, nice. That brings me to like a question that I was just like curious about. What's the message as like a person of color that went into engineering, especially like an engineering that's like so important like to everyone's life, not just like specific group of people? What's like your message to other like women of color who choose to go into engineering?
I say it's women of color, but also to women. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. Engineering is still mainly male dominated and it doesn't have a ton of diversity. I think it's definitely changing, and it depends on what kind of engineering you do. Like, it's funny, I see like there's some types of engineering that seem to just have more diversity, and I wonder if they're just kind of like bigger streams that maybe are more popular in other countries as well. So people who study in those other countries, they come with those skills when they immigrate to Canada, and maybe that's why you just see a wider variety of people. But even in transportation planning, you know, like for a while, I was the only female on my team, and I've only worked on my company for like 3 years, and also like, or the only person of color for a while. And I think it's so important. Like I said, like those experiences that shape you, just life experiences, they're important because not having that voice at the decision, like at the decision making moment, kind of robs other people who are not necessarily represented. I think sometimes you can definitely, like, it's not all unicorns and rainbows for sure, unfortunately. I know even in university, in your classes, you may be one of a few girls and definitely one of a few people of color, or at least women of color specifically in your classes. There are statistics that show that like usually entering an engineering degree, it's about 50-50. And then by the time people actually make it to the end, the percentage of women drops dramatically. Is the same thing as women entering the engineering field. The number of women who drop out after 5 years is pretty high. And that's shameful. It's shameful that we make these conditions that are not inviting to women, but I think it's so important that, you know, that we have other women of color, other women, other people of color, just other types of diverse people represented in engineering, because like I said, there's just so many life experiences that are not being considered. And when you create designs for the average person, when you engineer for the average person, you're missing so many other people that are not being served by whatever you come up with, right? So I think my message is like, please come and join us. You know, I'm very fortunate to be in a field where a lot of other women and women of color have kind of paved the way. And we kind of continue on the good fight. And I think we're making things better. And I know I'm very lucky and fortunate to be at a company that values me and values my perspective, and one where I have actually raised certain things about representation, perhaps, that we're actually taking quite seriously. And a lot of times people just didn't realize like it was an issue, right? So we need more voices, because otherwise, how are we going to have change?
Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. And yeah, I think like whenever I remember I did this thing once where I went to like the University of Toronto, and I was like shadow student there. And I was actually like, most people are always like, oh, like be wary that like going into these fields, like you're not gonna see a lot of people that look like you. And shocked to see like there were like it was pretty good representation. There was like a large amount of like women, like not a large amount, but like more than I thought. So it's like nice to see that like you may not, although there's gonna be like a few of you, like you're not gonna be alone. Like even like in a larger like group, you like especially first year, you're probably not gonna be alone. So it's nice to know that there are some people there to be with you. Uh, what do you love about your job?
So I love sort of, I think I've alluded to it and maybe mentioned it before. I love this high level nature of it. Like my job is kind of like the marriage of urban planning and engineering, because we're not quite necessarily like on either end of that spectrum. I like looking at systems. Like I like looking at cities as a whole and trying to figure out ways to make movement of people better just across the city, and figuring out, like just ways to make somebody's day easier. And they're never going to realize that you did this, but because my work has to do a lot with the public, there's a lot of community engagement and public engagement that is involved with the projects that I work on. And so we get to hear from like everyday citizens who take a bus or who use this road or who want to cycle down the street, and hearing their concerns and just coming up with ways to make it better for them to go to work or to go to school, or like you hear all kinds of stories where somebody will come up and say, hey, can you make this bus route connecting this area to this area, because I live here and a lot of people like me live here, but we all work in this factory over here and it takes us 2 hours to get to work every day. And these people have been doing that for years. And that's crazy to me. And it's so satisfying to be able to make changes that you see in these communities that you work in, and you see how it affects other people. And ideally, hopefully, that's the dream, is makes it better. So I'm really excited to be involved on work that I actually see when I travel through Ottawa, right? Like projects that I've actually worked on, or through other cities, and I can kind of say like, oh yeah, I remember when we planned to put this facility right here, or like when you see construction happening, what's going in there because you were involved with helping plan or design that. So those are really cool things that I really love about my job.
Oh, that actually, now that I think about it, like being a civil engineer means that you get to see like your work every day. That's so cool. Like it's not like if you just go to a lab or if you go to like a hospital, you get to see it like every day. When you're like on, just like even when you're not at work, it's all the time. Other than that, what do you find challenging?
I think, you say challenging, like I'm gonna go a little bit on a limb here for a bit, but I think about kind of automation, and a lot of like engineering is a profession, and the reason that they say that it's not at risk or not at much at risk of automation is because yes, you can get like a calculator or a computer to calculate all the numbers for you, and we already do. But at the end of the day, those numbers don't actually make a decision for you. Like you still have to decide where a road is going to go, or you have to decide if you're going to close this lane of traffic and put a cycling facility there. That's not like a computer doesn't decide for you. It just gives you all of the things. And it's people that make decisions by listening to what the community needs and what the community wants, and trying to figure out how you're going to make it work within a given budget. So I think a challenging thing is because of that, there's no right answer, right? And your decisions, like you can't say, yeah, this was the 10 out of 10 decision that made everything better for everybody. A lot of the times we work for you, we are doing our best, right? Like we're making decisions that are informed and to the best of our ability. Like engineers are kind of sworn to do the best for the public. So you're trying to make decisions that serve people best, but sometimes there's going to be people you don't serve best, and sometimes there are going to be things that you didn't consider that when it comes in there, like let's say you build a super nice sidewalk and you think it's really wide and people can walk, and now businesses can open patios. And then somebody points out, but I'm in a wheelchair and it's really hard for me to go around all of these obstacles now with the patio and the flower boxes and whatever. And you have to kind of like think on the fly and come up with solutions to that as well. But it's challenging to not be able to come up with solutions that serve everybody best, right? Like you never are going to find something that works for everybody. And also because these are dependent on people, different people can come up with different solutions. Again, there's no right solution. And then I think another thing that kind of like always peeves me a little bit, it not necessarily peeves me, but is a challenge for sure, is that we're working, as great as all these plans and dreams are, we have to be realistic. And so we have to work within budgets, and we have to come up with solutions that our cities can afford, and that also are cost efficient and stuff. And that means also sometimes the thing that you wanted, you might not get because there's just no budget for that and you can't make it happen. And so, sometimes that's a little like disheartening because you're like, but this is the best solution. But at the end of the day, there's different factors that you have to consider about what makes a solution the best. So, if we had unlimited money, I think we could make transportation the best everywhere, but we can't. And we have to still figure out ways to work within the budgets that we have.
Yeah, that's what, like, now that you said that, like, I think I never really considered how much, like, courage has to go into engineering, because, like, although I feel like all my life I've sort of seen, of course I've kind of seen, like, the people aspect of engineering, but usually when I think about that, I think about, like, talking about, like, with your client. But I never actually think about the fact that you're actually making something for someone, and, like, and especially with transportation, it's, like, with everyone in, like, the entire city. And, like, the courage of, like, taking on such a big challenge is, like, actually really crazy. So applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Who would you recommend your career path to?
I mean, I would recommend my career path to anybody who is, I know we talked about engineering and science and math, and those are important. It's important to be interested in those, because I think if you absolutely hate science and math, maybe this is not the right career path for you. But I really want to stress that it's so much more than that. Like, you don't have to be like a wizard at math and science to be a successful engineer. I think I would recommend this career to somebody who's passionate about making, the community they live in a better place, or, the world a better place, because stuff like environmental engineering, there are things about how do you provide energy to everybody. There's so many different types of engineering, and all of it is focused about making life better for people. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I would recommend this to you. If you are somebody who knows how to problem solve, or who's interested in working to problem solve, and who's not necessarily discouraged when they try the first time and it doesn't work out the first time, or maybe you find out you're wrong, I recommend that to them. I recommend it to somebody who's kind of interested in constantly learning, because I am still in the early sort of days of my career for sure, but I think even working with some of my older colleagues, it's something you are always learning new things, new ways of doing things. And you have to be open-minded to that, and you have to be ready to recognize when you're wrong. So if you're somebody who wants to keep learning always, I recommend engineering to you. If you like working with people, and if you know how to work in a team to get stuff done, I'd recommend that to you. So I think if you're passionate about all of those different qualities, I definitely recommend that. I would definitely recommend engineering as a career path. And then specifically for transportation planning, I mean, if you're interested in how cities work, if you want to help move people and goods throughout our communities and find better ways to make people travel in a way that's safer and healthier, all of those things, I recommend that for you as well.
Oh, that was nice, because it's so good to hear that, because usually, like, whenever I like hear anyone else, like, their reasons to become an engineer, at least, like, a lot of students are like, I was good at math and science, and then my teacher kind of just recommended it to me, so now that's not where I am. But it's like, it's really important to know about like the other aspects and like things that you because like you said, I think it's so easy like to see that it's something that you're constantly learning because like you said earlier that every solution that may be different for someone, so you're even at your learn from different people and their different like schools or their different classes. So yeah, it's so important to know about the other things that goes into engineering.
And I was going to say that's also like it's not just my type of engineering. I mean, again, I'm broader level, but I have friends who are like pipeline designers, and I have friends who work in biomedical engineering and software and stuff, and all of those things still apply. Like, don't get me wrong, like there's going to be math and science, and you're going to have math and science in lots of your classes in engineering will be engineering classes. So I'm not saying that's not important, but I don't think that's the most important thing. And I think if the answer for somebody like, why did you go into engineering is, I don't was good at math and science, that's kind of disheartening to me because do you really enjoy what you're doing though? Like there's many other things that also require math and science. And I would hope that most people would want to be passionate about what they do because you're going to spend a lot of your life at work. So you might as well like it a little bit, right?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. So, are there any advantages or limitations to being a female in your industry?
I mean, I don't know. I would not call being who I am like I would not say that that's ever a limitation. I think there's challenges associated with it. Maybe sometimes often being the only person who looks like you in the room, it can be really scary, especially when you're starting out and you're sort of younger. And unfortunately, like I have come across people who are not necessarily the kindest or who are not necessarily the most progressive and who say things that I think are not appropriate. And they tend to be from an older age when engineering was pretty much completely male dominated. And it still happens, unfortunately. And I think knowing how to stand up for yourself and also finding a workplace that values you for who you are. Again, like I'm very lucky to be in a place where I don't feel like that's a problem, and where I feel like I can challenge things that come up, but that's not everywhere. And that still exists. I think it's getting so much better all the time. And I think having more women and people of color in these workplaces is helping make that better. But those are still things. Sometimes kind of finding your voice when you are the only person who is the odd person out. That can be a challenge for sure. And it can, like from my experience, it can make you really second guess yourself and kind of feel like a fraud in your position. Like, why do I really deserve it? Like all of those things. But you're not good. So that's unfortunately still a challenge, but something that I'm really hopeful that is getting better all the time. I think an advantage for sure is having that perspective. I also think, there's a lot of qualities that are considered like masculine and that like being assertive, and that's what makes a good leader, and being somebody who just doesn't care what other people think and just like very overconfident and stuff. And I don't think that's true because also that overshadows a lot of the, again, qualities that people consider to be feminine, like empathy and things like that. But there's been so much research and also a lot of just like anecdotal evidence from just seeing interactions that those qualities are really important in leadership too, and perhaps more important. So, coming from a place where I think some of those masculine qualities were overvalued, like having a different perspective and working with teams differently, I think is an advantage, because a lot of the times, like especially now that I work sort of with some folks who are sort of junior and are working a little under me now, I am able to get insights from them that a lot of their other managers can't, because they trust me more. And because of that, I'm able to work with my team better. I think also like the perspective thing, right? Like having all of my experiences as a woman, also as a person of color, as an immigrant, all of those things kind of shape my worldview, and they affect the decisions that I'm making. and the solutions that I come up to and the things that I'm considering when I'm doing my work. So I think all of those things are advantages because they add another lens to what we do, right? If you have all these people who mainly have similar life experiences, there's just going to be so many things you don't consider because you just never had to, you know. I talk about like abilities and disabilities, and you know, considering that and how you design your street. I think I've made that example, but I think it's the same thing for being a woman or a person of color or whatever other aspect of your identity. There's other things that you might be able to think of that can make a solution better that other people may not come up with on their own.
I would like to thank Mariam Bello for talking to us on her work at Dillian Consulting Limited. I am Huda Haji. Thank you for watching another session of Girls Talk TV on RPTV.